You've been told your whole life to focus. Pick one thing, master it, commit. But every time you try, something else catches your attention. A new idea, a different angle, another path that feels just as important. And the guilt starts to creep in. Maybe you're the problem. Maybe you lack discipline. Maybe everyone else figured out how to choose, and you're still here, scattered across too many interests, finishing nothing, belonging nowhere. But what if the problem isn't you? What if the way you're wired isn't a flaw at all? What if everything you've been taught about focus is designed for a different kind of mind? Let me show you something that might change how you see yourself. There's a moment that happens when you get emotionally triggered that most people never notice. It lasts exactly 90 seconds. Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor, a Harvard-trained neuroanatomist, discovered this after she had a stroke and could watch her own brain's emotional responses from the inside. She realized that when something upsets you, your brain releases a flood of stress hormones, adrenaline, noradrenaline. They surge through your bloodstream. And then, if you don't do anything to keep them going, they flush out naturally, in 90 seconds. The anger you feel when someone cuts you off in traffic? 90 seconds. The sting when someone dismisses your idea? 90 seconds. That wave of shame when you remember something you said 5 years ago? 90 seconds. But here's the thing. Most of us are still angry 20 minutes later, still replaying it, still rehearsing what we should have said. That's not the chemicals anymore. That's you choosing to re-trigger yourself. Your amygdala, the emotional control center in your brain, sounds the alarm. The stress response kicks in. But after 90 seconds, it's done. The alarm stops. Unless you keep making more toast. You know that feeling when you burn toast and the smoke alarm goes off? You could open a window and let the smoke clear, or you could stand there and keep making toast, wondering why the alarm won't stop. Most people spend their entire lives making more toast. Here's what makes this even more interesting. Anger isn't even what you think it is. Research in psychodynamic therapy and emotion-focused work has shown that anger is almost never the first emotion. It's a secondary response, a security guard that shows up to protect something more vulnerable underneath. When someone criticizes you and you get angry, you're not really angry. You're hurt. You feel unseen, unvalued. When your partner forgets something important and you explode, underneath that anger is a quieter question. Do I matter to you? Anger feels safer than vulnerability. It gives you energy instead of exposing your pain. It creates the illusion of control. But it's not the real emotion. The real emotion is the one you don't want to feel. And this matters because when you address the hurt, the fear, the shame underneath, something actually shifts. When you say, "I felt forgotten," instead of "you never remember anything," the entire conversation changes. Vulnerability heals. Anger just creates distance. Now here's where it gets harder. Even when you know this, even when you understand the 90-second rule and the hidden emotions underneath, you still have to choose how to respond. And most of the time, you don't even realize there's a choice. There's a quote often attributed to Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. Frankl never actually wrote those words. That's a misattribution. But his entire life demonstrated the truth of it. He survived the Nazi concentration camp by realizing that no matter what was done to him, no one could take away his freedom to choose his response, his attitude, his inner life. That space between what happens to you and how you respond is real. But it's not a long, contemplative pause. It's a microsecond, a flash of awareness before your automatic reaction takes over. Most people miss it entirely. When someone sends you a passive-aggressive email, your first impulse is to fire back. But in that moment before you hit send, there's a choice point. What response would I be proud of tomorrow? That question activates something different in your brain. It pulls your prefrontal cortex back online, the part responsible for planning and reasoning, the part that goes offline when your amygdala hijacks you. The people you know who never seem to get rattled, they're not superhuman. They've just learned to find that space, that microsecond, and they've practiced widening it. But knowing this doesn't make it easy, because your triggers aren't random. They follow patterns, and those patterns come from somewhere. Think about the last time you got really upset. Not mildly annoyed, deeply triggered. Now ask yourself, who was involved? What did they say or do? What did it remind you of? Most people never ask that last question, but that's where the answer lives. When your boss uses a certain tone and you immediately feel defensive, it's probably not about your boss. It's about the authority figure from your past who never trusted you, your parent, your teacher, someone who made you feel small. When sarcasm sets you off, it's not the words themselves. It's the sibling or friend who used sarcasm to hurt you when you were too young to defend yourself. Your triggers are showing you exactly where you still need healing. They're not random landmines, they're maps. And when you start tracking them, when you keep even a simple journal for 1 week noting what triggered you and what it reminded you of, you start to see the patterns. I always get triggered by impatient authority figures. Dismissive comments make me shut down because I felt invisible as a kid. Suddenly, you're not being blindsided anymore. You can see it coming. And when you see it coming, you can prepare. Preparation transforms reaction into response. Here's what nobody tells you about boundaries. They don't keep people out, they keep you intact. Research from 2022 found that people who regularly enforce boundaries were significantly less likely to experience burnout. A 2021 study showed that those who struggle to set boundaries had higher rates of anxiety and depression. But we've been taught that boundaries are selfish, that caring about someone means carrying their emotions, that love means always being available. That's not love, that's enmeshment. You can care about someone without carrying their pain. You can witness someone's struggle without drowning in it with them. Think of a lifeguard. When someone's drowning, the lifeguard doesn't jump in and drown with them. They throw a life preserver. They stay grounded so they can actually help. Boundaries are what let you stay grounded. And here's the paradox. People with healthy boundaries actually have better relationships, not fewer, better. Because boundaries prevent the resentment that eventually destroys connection. When you say yes when you mean no, when you give more than you have, when you absorb someone else's chaos to keep the peace, you're not being kind, you're building resentment. And resentment is poison. A boundary sounds like this. I care about you, but I can only listen to this problem for 5 minutes unless you want to brainstorm solutions. Or, I understand you're frustrated, but I don't respond well to yelling. Can we talk when you're calmer? That's not aggressive, it's honest. It's protecting your capacity to actually show up for the people you love instead of burning out and having nothing left to give. But even with boundaries, even with awareness of your triggers in that 90-second window, you're still going to get overwhelmed sometimes. And that's when you need the observer. Inside you, there's a part that can watch your emotions without becoming them. It's the part that can think, I'm noticing anger arising, instead of I am angry. When your teenager rolls their eyes at you, instead of immediately getting defensive, you can activate this observer. I notice irritation rising, heart rate increasing. Now you're watching the emotion instead of being swept away by it. You can experience it without being controlled by it. This is what mindfulness research has been studying for years, and the findings are remarkable. A 2024 systematic review found that mindfulness meditation actually changes your brain. It increases cortical thickness. It reduces amygdala reactivity. It improves the connectivity between the emotional centers and the reasoning centers. People who practice mindfulness don't feel fewer emotions, they just don't get hijacked by them as easily. They've strengthened the part of the brain that can pause, that can observe, that can choose. And the research is clear. Even brief practices work. 10-minute meditations, single-session interventions, mobile apps. The key is consistency, not duration. Here's the part that might be hardest to accept. The difficult people in your life aren't obstacles, they're teachers. That micromanaging boss who sends 15 emails a day, they're training your resilience muscle. That passive-aggressive neighbor, they're developing your boundary-setting skills. Every person who triggers you is showing you exactly where you need to grow. Not because they're trying to help you, most of them aren't, but because your reaction is revealing your unhealed places. When you can start seeing difficult people as emotional trainers, something shifts. You stop being a victim, you become a student. And students ask different questions. Instead of, why are they doing this to me, you ask, what is this teaching me? That critical voice that always finds the flaw? Maybe they're helping you practice staying calm under pressure. That friend who constantly needs rescuing? Maybe they're showing you where you need to strengthen your boundaries. It doesn't mean you have to tolerate abuse. It doesn't mean you stay in toxic situations, but it means you can extract the lesson even from the pain. None of this is about perfection. You're not going to catch every trigger. You're not going to find the choice point every time. You're going to say things you regret. You're going to react before you respond. That's not failure. That's being human. The goal isn't to never feel anger or hurt or fear. The goal is to develop a different relationship with those feelings, to notice them sooner, to understand what they're protecting, to choose your response more often than you're hijacked by your reaction. And the research shows that even small, consistent changes create massive transformation over time. Pick one technique, just one. Maybe it's the 90-second rule. The next time you feel that surge of anger, you just pause and watch it. You don't feed it. You let the chemicals flush. Or maybe it's the observer self. You practice noticing, irritation is here, instead of becoming the irritation. Or maybe it's trigger journal. You spend 5 minutes at the end of each day noting what set you off and what it reminded you of. Just one practice for 1 week. Because the person who never gets bothered by anyone isn't born different. They've just practiced these skills until they became automatic. And you can too. The truth is, you've been carrying other people's emotions your whole life. You've been letting their words define your worth. You've been giving away your peace to people who don't even know they're taking it. But nobody can push buttons you don't give them. Those buttons are yours. The triggers are yours. The reactions are yours. Which means the power to change them is yours too. Not by becoming cold or detached, not by building walls or shutting people out, but by understanding what's really happening underneath the surface, by finding that space between what happens and how you respond, by choosing vulnerability over anger, boundaries over resentment, observation over reaction. The next time someone says something that ruins your day, remember, the feeling will last 90 seconds, unless you keep feeding it. The choice is yours. What would change if you stopped making toast?